how exactly is alcohol impairing your decision making? What's happening in the brain?
It kind of slows every aspect of your brain. It can reduce anxiety. It can slow down, kind of give more of a sedative effect.
35,000 decisions a day. When I first heard that number, I was like, no way. No way am I making that many decisions a day.
Assuming that most people nowadays suffer from decision fatigue, so they go for drinks after work, you're having two compounding factors. And when you look at the stats of decision making, how many decisions we make, it's actually something that we should all probably be more cognizant of is how the decisions we make impact us.
The idea of cutting down on the decisions that you make feels really hard. Hey there, and welcome back to The Upward Spiral. This is the podcast where we explore the incredible power of intentional living to help you unlock your full potential. And guess what? It all starts with taking a mindful look at our relationship with alcohol. So in today's episode, we're going deep into the fascinating world of neuroscience to uncover how alcohol affects our decision-making. You'll learn exactly how that extra glass of wine can cloud your judgment and lead to choices you might regret later. We've all been there. But don't worry, we're not here just to point out the problems. We're also going to equip you with the practical strategies to make smarter choices and protect your brain. So whether you're questioning your drinking habits, actively reducing your intake, or fully embracing an alcohol-free lifestyle, this episode is packed with valuable insights to help you live a more intentional and fulfilling life. I'm your host, Michelle O'Brien, and I'm so excited to guide you on this journey. A couple of years ago, I decided to ditch the booze and see what happened. And let's just say the results were pretty amazing. Not only did I feel physically healthier, but I also experienced a newfound mental clarity and emotional resilience that has honestly completely changed my life. And speaking of amazing, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Shawn Watson. So this guy is a rock star in the neuroscience world. He holds a PhD in neurophysiology. He's a published author, and he's also been recognized as one of the top 10 influencers in healthcare in Singapore. Not only that, but he is also the founder and CEO of Senescence Life Sciences, a company dedicated to researching and developing neuroprotective compounds. Oh my God, that was such a mouthful, Shawn. Welcome.
You said it all right.
To the Upward Spiral. You are probably the smartest person that I know.
You need to get to know more people, I think.
No way. I'm absolutely fascinated by the work that you do. I can't wait to get into this conversation. And I do just want to caveat to our listeners that we are working together on a project at the moment, the launch of a new product, which is very linked to the conversation that we're going to be having today, and something we'll reveal in due course, but always kind of want to have that clarity. So anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, excited to be here. This is my first podcast. So you take that honors. Yeah.
Really?
It is, yeah.
That surprises me because you've done lots of speaking engagements and things.
Lots of engagements, yeah. Never the podcast.
Not even on Zoom?
No, I guess live stuff, but nothing that's recorded like this, which is a little more forgiving, which is great, I suppose.
Yeah, we're going to be chopping this up, editing everything out. No, we're going to keep all the good stuff in for sure. So look, I want to get into the questions because I've got a lot of them today.
Let's go. I'll do my best. No pressure.
Oh, yeah, you're going to nail it. We know. So your background in neurophysiology is really incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in brain health and optimization?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it started with, I guess, a lot of kids who like biology in high school. I wanted to be a medical doctor. Then I got to my undergrad and got a taste of research and got super excited. My first project was under a neuroscientist. Got fascinated by the brain in general and research, just kind of the open world, kind of follow your imagination approach. Near the same time, my grandparents actually also started to suffer from Alzheimer's disease, or what we think was Alzheimer's. So there's a very personal component to why to look in those types of conditions. But I guess just the research side just is absolutely, especially when we talk about the brain, it's so unexplored, and that component of it was what really kind of got me excited.
I love that. Bit of a nerd, bit of a personal connection.
Definitely a nerd. Yeah.
I love that. I was totally creative, so I definitely wasn't into the science space. You have achieved a lot in your career, and leading Senescence Life Sciences to being recognized as one of the top influencers in healthcare. how do you do it? Like what drives your passion? Because you've got to have passion to do this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess philosophically, I think like the brain is really the last frontier for us biologically. So obviously physically we're there's still things we can do to improve our body and whatnot, but the brain to me is remarkable because there's no foreseeable limit, because it's really driven by our imagination, right? Like, and when you talk about human imagination, a weird quirk of evolution or why we have it, there's really no limit to what we can imagine. The only thing that's going to hold us back is our brain and how fast we can think, how well we can think. So I think that philosophically is why I'm always so passionate about the brain and pushing forward the optimization and making sure people are performing the best they can with what we're given. Senescence at its core too is just making sure that whatever we do, we bring science to the equation. Because obviously in cognition and cognitive health, there's a lot of interest in the space. People are fascinated by the topic and see it as an avenue of where they still want to improve. But there's also a lot of maybe bad players in the industry. And so we have to make sure we kind of keep those scientific undertones to make sure what we're doing is validated in the best means that we know how today. So yeah, a few different things and what our goals and purposes as a company, and then me personally.
And so I love this kind of idea that we don't actually know a lot about the brain. Like, how true is that?
It's a hidden secret. I mean, we say like PhD in neuroscience. One of the first things you learn, I mean, I was never as arrogant as when I finished my undergrad. I thought I knew everything. And then the deeper I got into my PhD, the more you realize like, oh my God, we don't know too much. So the brain is honestly, it's unexplored, I would say. Obviously, over the last few decades, we've learned a lot. Neuroscience is a relatively new field too, I would say, compared to the more traditional sciences in biology. But the complexity of the brain is astounding, right? So call it 70 billion neurons. Some have 10,000 connections each. Integration between all of those is mind-boggling to even comprehend. I mean, there's hidden poetry too in that we're trying to understand it, right? Our brain is trying to understand itself. But yeah, we have a long way to go still in neuro, which makes it so fun.
And absolutely fascinating, because you think we'd know more about it by now.
Yeah, poorly held secret, I suppose.
Or at least people lead you to believe that we know more
lead
about
you to believe, I think. Yeah. No, there's a lot more to go. So,
yeah. And in terms of the brain's capacity, I can't remember the exact stat, but it gets touted around that we're only using X% of what our brain is truly capable of.
Yeah, there's a few concepts around it. So, I mean, the one I commonly hear is like we only use 10% of our brain, which would be incorrect. So maybe 10% at one time, but we don't, because we don't use all your brain at once. Right now, you're not solving a math problem or using the part of your brain that would solve a math problem. Maybe now because you're thinking about it. But so no, that it's a kind of a misstep that we only use 10% of our capacity. That being said, there's no foreseeable limit for the potential of our brain. So how intelligent we can get, how smart we can get, how much information we can hold. Like if you look at standards for IQ tests, for example, or things like that, like we've steadily improved our intelligence as humans as we've progressed in education systems and whatnot. So no, we do use all of our brain, but it doesn't mean that we can't optimize and continue to improve the performance of the organ itself.
Okay, this is fascinating. We're going to totally digress from decision making and from alcohol, but I do have to ask, and I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking this: if we're, if there is not a limit to how much we could use, will there be substances like the limitless pill? Could that exist one day, or is it going to be more like exercise, like you train your brain to do more, or is it an evolution thing?
Yeah, good question. There probably will one day be pills that help for sure. But I think that one of the limits is there's intelligence and then there's wisdom. Like maybe to take a bit of a step back from science, so to speak, that I can solve, a young person can solve a math problem much quicker than an older person can. But that older person may have tips or tricks or wisdom to take shortcuts to do things quicker, right? So intelligence and wisdom, I think, are two separate things that the wisdom part you only get from life experiences and whatnot versus just the hardcore computational power of the brain. So I think some respects, while we can improve the hardware computational power, there's always going to be something about wisdom that we're going to require as humans, that life experience or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, probably a pill, but not quite like the movie, so to speak.
I've never thought about intelligence and wisdom, but you're...
probably not a hard definition, but I think it's important to understand that, because usually when you tell age people like, hey, your brain is slower than a younger person, they get a little disappointed. But the reality is actually, no, they probably have so many shortcuts, which, yeah, you can refer to as maybe wisdom that they've learned over the years, which makes a massive difference, right?
Yeah, I love that. And all these people, these biohackers seeking longevity, physical longevity, it's also trying to go after the mental longevity, right? And the brain and the health of the brain.
I think one thing that binds any culture or society together is aging, and particularly the fear of losing our mental capacities. So when you talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, I mean, I hear the same scares and worries of people in North America as I do here in Asia, right? So longevity and living longer, people don't necessarily care if they lose their capacities, right? So it's about improving health span, making sure that, when we pass, our brain is still right with us every step of the way. So certainly a goal, and that's one thing that Senescence is the company works towards. But at large, I think it's what humanity is trying to accomplish as well.
Right. Okay. We've totally digressed because it's such a fascinating subject, and I've got so many questions I'm definitely going to be kind of pestering you about for years to come, I'm sure. So today we're going to be talking about how alcohol affects decision making. But first, before we kind of get into that, let's talk about decision science. What is decision science, and how did you get into that?
Yeah, fascinating topic. First off, it's one of those really cool things in neuroscience, because decisions and what we'll talk about, decision fatigue and whatnot, is something that's relatively new to the field, which is quite rare in neuroscience, because usually we know the problems that exist. To have something like this is quite interesting. For me, why I got interested in decisions is during COVID, stuck in my condo, like many people were during that time. And I started reading a ton of papers and filling my time with reading. And I came across this concept of decision fatigue. But what was fascinating to me is psychologically, we've known about this condition for quite some time. But as neuroscientists, we were starting actually to understand the physiological underpinning. So what was actually happening in the brain on like a network or cell level that caused this condition of decision fatigue to happen in people. And that kind of changeover got me very excited, because it's in my field. Synaptic biology, how neurons talk to one another, is kind of right up my alley. So that's what got me initially started on it. And then I really started to think about the implications of decision making. And actually, I think as individuals and probably as a society, we don't think about our decisions enough. And when you look at the stats of decision making and how many decisions we make, it's actually something that we should all probably be more cognizant of, is how the decisions we make impact us. I mean, which is all about your podcast as well, right? As making these meaningful decisions and focusing on decision making, which is, I think, quite often in life, we kind of just get on a train and go for it. We don't have that kind of thoughtful approach to our decisions. You
mentioned decision fatigue at the start. So what is decision fatigue?
Sure. Yeah. So decision fatigue is when the quality of our decisions begins to decline over a long period of decision making, or it can happen over a short period of time if we're in situations of stress or anxiety. So really important to kind of delineate or separate decision fatigue from mental fatigue. So mental fatigue is what we've all heard of before. This is when you feel tired, right? When you wake up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee, you have an energy drink, something to improve your feeling of wakefulness. That's mental fatigue. Decision fatigue is kind of mutually exclusive from that. So you can feel wide awake and have decision fatigue, or feel very tired and have decision fatigue, but it's a very separate condition. And decision fatigue has kind of one of two consequences. So the first consequence of decision fatigue is what we call decision avoidance. So it's actually when your brain says, you know what, I've made too many decisions today. I'm not going to make any more decisions. So this can be as benign as coming home from a long day of work, and your partner says, what movie or what restaurant do you want to go to tonight? And you say, I don't want to pick, right? You make that decision.
I've got nothing.
Yeah, so something we can relate to, right?
Yeah.
But it could be as serious as a soldier freezing up in combat, being unable to make a decision. The second consequence of decision fatigue is maybe a bit more sinister, and we can think of it as default decision making. This is when your brain will actually start to take the decision process away from your conscious mind and move it into your unconscious. It says, I've made too many decisions today. I'm going to start taking shortcuts to help with decision making, and I'm going to rely on unconscious decisions.
So I don't know what's have for dinner, so I'm just going to order a McDonald's.
Sorry. Yes, there you go.
Just
If that's
gonna
your
order
default.
McDonald's.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few really interesting studies that have been done on the default decision making, because what's interesting is your brain will resort back to what it thinks is the safest decision or the most comfortable decision. So a study was done out of the UK for loan officers, and they found that actually they're more likely to approve a loan in the morning than the afternoon. Because in the afternoon, they suffered from decision fatigue, the loan officers, and the unconscious default kind of safer decision is to say no to a loan. A similar study was done in Stanford. I think it was repeated in Israel with judges and for parole judges. So, a person comes before the judge asking for parole, and the judge actually was far more likely to give parole in the morning than the afternoon. Why? Because the judge, again, had decision fatigue, and the unconscious kind of safer decision is to keep the person in prison rather than put them in the community. So huge repercussions for decision fatigue, as like ordering McDonald's or Netflix to your whole future in life from a parole hearing.
Yeah, wow, like fascinating. But you said it's the safest, so you either kind of default to the safest decision or the most comfortable. What about habits?
Great question. Because I think if you look at it at large, decision fatigue probably makes it much more difficult to make or break a habit. So if you're looking to get more fit, right? And you say, I'm going to go to the gym in the morning, probably a better decision, because in the morning you don't have decision fatigue, right? Because you just woke up, you haven't made all those decisions yet. Versus if you say, I'm going to start working out at 7 p.m. at night, right? By 7 p.m., you had a long day at work or at home or whatever you did, you may have decision fatigue. It's going to be much more difficult to make a new novel decision versus you resorting back to, I'm going to, make some popcorn and watch a movie. So even when it comes to alcohol, right?
Yeah.
If people are trying to break a habit, it's difficult, because if you suffer from this condition, it's going to be much harder to make novel decisions.
And I really want to come onto that a little bit later, because it's that when the habit of coming home and pouring yourself a glass of wine, especially if you've had a long day of decision making, it's going to be hard to change. But let's come back onto that, because first of all, I want to understand what's happening to the brain on booze. So what happens in the brain when we've had a drink?
Great question.
Big question, sorry.
No, I mean, it's a field unto itself. And first, hats off to the neuroscientists who tackle this issue, because it's alcohol is a very dirty substance in the sense that it does everything, it seems, to every part of your brain. And the sheer number of publications, I'm talking like peer-reviewed publications that are coming out, you're talking about thousands probably a year. So to stay on top of this field, you're going to have the research folks doing, reading 3 to 4 publications a day probably. So I'll just say it's very complex. There are some general trends certainly that we can pull up for what alcohol does. First, probably good to segment it. So there's short-term effects that, of course, it has in your brain, and then there's long-term effects. And then there's things like addiction or dependencies upon alcohol, especially going with chronic use. So if we just look at more of the short-term effects, and when you're considering performance and being the best you, we're looking at just taking away that one glass of wine that you have to transition out of work.
Yeah.
So what part of your brain does it affect? I mean, it goes from your executive functions in your frontal lobe, so things about your decision-making capabilities, of course, which I'm sure we'll touch on, to even who you are as, your personality, your prefrontal cortex, to your cerebellum, your movement controls, right? So how, you've seen people very intoxicated and how they get stumbly. That's probably effects from your cerebellum. To even your hippocampus, your ability to form memory. So your hippocampus is kind of like the memory center of your brain. It helps to delegate out certain types of information to other parts, but can have a huge effect on that part of your brain. So, long story short, it probably affects every aspect of your brain, or every part of your brain. But there's a few areas that the most research has been into to highlight around decision-making, movement, and memories. I would say those are the top 3.
Yeah. And the science behind it is alcohol gets into the bloodstream, goes straight into the brain. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it goes very easy. Yeah. There's a blood-brain barrier that's usually a challenge for drug delivery and things like that. But no, alcohol can rapidly pass through all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Memory loss. Yep. The movement. Yep. I actually have got a question around the personality bit, because before we kind of get into the decision making, I hate it when people say to me, alcohol reveals who you really are, or alcohol reveals the real you when you're drunk. And like that really like upsets me to my core, because I think, well, I would never say that thing or do that thing when I wasn't drinking. Like I would never be so hurtful. And there's just this huge part of me that doesn't want to believe that that's really me inside. Is it?
Great question. Quick answer, in my opinion, no. But because I think there's a few concepts that are maybe crossing over there. So alcohol lowers inhibitions, and I think that's where that concept, like what you said, like, oh, it's just revealing the real you, right? And we know, like, I mean, it's the, yeah, like you tell someone that you like them, you would have never done that if you didn't have a few drinks, right? So there's that idea to it. But the reality for your personality is, yes, alcohol can actually change who you are, though. It affects that part of your brain, so you're not behaving as you are. So it's not you necessarily who's acting the way that they are. So no, incorrect to say I think that you're showing your real you. No, it's you under a substance.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it is. So I think that would be incorrect. But there's a lot of in popular culture, there's a lot of rose glass, or putting the rose color over the whole concept of drinking or whatnot to try to give a positive benefit or vibe to it, maybe to make it more acceptable. But no, you're drinking a poison essentially that makes you not act the way you normally would. Yes, it does lower inhibitions as one component, but it does a lot of other things as well.
That whole how alcohol has been portrayed for our entire lives, in movies, media, advertising, everything is a topic for a conversation on another day, because it really is kind of huge, the brainwashing that we've had our entire lives of this is how, this alcohol's great, this is this great thing that you need to have fun and you need, for everything.
Well, it's no different from cigarettes a generation ago, right? Yeah. How was the cool, tough cowboy smoking? Then nowadays we look back, we're like, my God, what were we thinking? Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
But in that whole alcohol changes your personality, there's a lot of relief for me to hear that. I think because that's something that has been on my mind and something that I've questioned a lot in sobriety. But it's also quite scary as well that it can do that to you. But let's come back. So what's to the decision making? So how exactly is alcohol impairing your decision making? What's happening in the brain?
Great question. Again, extremely complicated. So there's a lot of different things that are going on, and it pretty much affects every aspect, every neurotransmitter you can think of in the brain. But if we were to kind of pick out two, just for simplicity's sakes, if we say two neurotransmitters, so a neurotransmitter, if you remember, so we have a neuron, an electrical signal comes across, it releases a chemical which crosses a synapse, a small space between neurons, and that chemical attaches to another neuron and continues on as another electrical signal. So it's an electrical signal into a chemical signal back to an electrical signal. That's the synapse. The connection is what we call the synapse, and that chemical is the neurotransmitter. Lots of different neurotransmitters in your brain. There could be hundreds for all we know. There's a few key ones. One of the key ones is GABA, and it's one of the big ones that is affected by alcohol. So GABA is what we call an inhibitory signal. So alcohol actually increases the potency of GABA in your brain, which inhibits or slows things down. So it kind of slows every aspect of your brain. It can reduce anxiety. It can slow down, kind of give more of a sedative effect. The other neurotransmitter effects is glutamate. Glutamate is one of the most common excitatory neurotransmitters. So it increases activity, right? But alcohol actually lowers that down as well. And this is the neurotransmitter that would affect things like movement. So your reaction, how you're slower with alcohol, is because it has that effect on glutamate. Glutamate, though, is also involved in memory formation and all those different things. If we talk about decision-making in particular and the relation to decision fatigue, because it's quite curious to me how our decision-making capability relates to alcohol, but then also add decision fatigue on top, assuming that most people nowadays suffer from decision fatigue. So they go for drinks after work. You're having two compounding factors. And what's interesting with alcohol is it can actually cause a change in a certain protein called GLT1. And GLT1 actually helps to remove glutamate from a synapse. So that connection between cells, every time a signal comes across and glutamate or a neurotransmitter is released, that neurotransmitter needs to be cleared away in order for a new signal to come. And so GLT1 is this protein that helps to pull that away, right? When you drink or with alcohol, actually can slow down the activity of that protein such that glutamate will stay in a synapse longer. What that may potentially cause is the signal starts to get interrupted because there's that leftover waste, if you want to call it, in the synapse. It's leftover glutamate. So the fidelity or the connection to the synapse declines. What's interesting is that's one of the theories for the cause of decision fatigue. So it could be one mechanism of action that both, alcohol as well as just decision fatigue are interacting on the synapse on. And looking at glutamate specifically, there's probably other components as well, but you may have a compound effect between those two. So not just alcohol affecting decisions, because I know I went on a tangent, but how it relates to decision fatigue is really cool as well.
Yeah. So with decision fatigue, we've got decision, like one of the consequences of decision avoidance and default decision making. But when you're drinking, you can make decisions and sometimes they're not great. So what could potentially be happening there?
Sure. Quite a bit to unpack. So of course, like I said, every aspect is affected. So you have input of information, which could be affected by alcohol, right? So how you're perceiving the world around you could be different under that. So that's the first thing, is the information you're getting is different. How it processes could be different. So a lot of processing can happen in the hippocampus, right? Before it goes to memory and whatever else. And then also recall can be affected. So kind of every stream of an information highway can be affected by alcohol. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about bad decisions, well, it could be any one of those processes that led you to make a poor decision or choice. Yeah. Or of course, it could be that same mechanism which I described for decision fatigue, is maybe if alcohol is compounding the effects of decision fatigue, maybe you're making a default decision, a more comfortable decision for you, even though it's maybe not appropriate to the situation that you're currently in. Yeah.
So I was in a story time now, right? I was in a lift a couple of weeks ago. So I went to a Formula One closing party. No, it was Token 2049 closing party, the big crypto event on the roof of Sailor V at the top of Marina Bay Sands. Very glam, definitely out of my depth, but I had a great time until the heavens opened. We all got absolutely soaked at midnight, and we're in the lift down. Obviously, I didn't drink. I was kind of drinking soda all night. Had a great time. And we were kind of packed in the lift, and I think there must have been 25 people in the lift heading down, and we're going a long way, 30, 40 stories. There was a girl in the lift, and she was quite inebriated. You could kind of just see unsteady on her feet, eyes kind of rolling around the head. And she starts trying to have a fight with another girl who, in my opinion, looked like she hadn't really been drinking, looked relatively sober, especially kind of in comparison. And the drunk girl was kind of like, what are you looking at? Starting to kind of, so it had obviously, like you just said, kind of those mechanisms, like your input. This drunk girl had obviously had this input, had, maybe seen somebody looking at her, seen it as a threat, then starts kind of acting on that. I'm just trying to think about kind of what's going on in her brain because of the alcohol and the bad decisions that she was making in trying to start a fight in an incredibly closed environment, much to kind of everyone's worry who was in the lift with them. So what could be happening there in that scenario?
Good question. I think probably something everybody has seen at some point, especially being a young teenage boy at some point, or early in uni, you're always trying to prove something. Tough to pinpoint any one thing, to be honest, with what alcohol does. I mean, I will even say, like, a recent paper came out, and maybe you can put it in a link, the paper, to give the authors all the credit, showed how alcohol actually reduces our motivation to cooperate with other humans. So it just reduces that motivation to even be kind of a nice person and get along with people, right? Now, pinpoint an exact neural track or part of the brain that's doing that, well, we could probably make a good guess, but something like that is pretty remarkable that a substance can do it. So there'd be a whole host of things that was going on in the young lady's brain at the time. But even just, she doesn't want to cooperate with people. That's an effect of alcohol. So if there's team parties at work or whatnot, and there's alcohol there, you need to keep that in mind as well. is it make people kind of just mean to each other.
Oh, we're not painting a great picture of alcohol here, but but yeah, that's interesting because that's, I think in my time drinking, I probably have started fights, and it's just, yeah, like you think what led me to make that decision? Why was I reading that situation in that way? Like I never would have reacted like that, and I never would have made the decision to do whatever I did. There's so much that comes up the morning after.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't you though, right? So that the logical you was behind kind of that glass of alcohol or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's difficult. Like I said, it's just such a dirty substance that does so much that it's just tough to pinpoint any one thing it does, but it certainly affects your brain. Is you. Everything that you are is your brain, right? And it impacts everything there.
But when you said you're not you, I've got so many kind of like philosophical like questions in here, because whilst, like I said earlier, so much of me didn't want to know that was my true personality coming out. And you've just said, well, you're not you. But then there are a lot of people who maybe abuse alcohol who would take that as an excuse to behave the way they do, or as, well, it's not me, so therefore.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, you need to think of it as, well, I mean, me personally, it's a psychoactive substance that as a culture, we've decided to make in a society, okay to drink, okay to, right? But there's there's other psychoactive drugs that are illegal, right? That we've as a society said, hey, you're not allowed to take these, right? What would you put on someone who was on go the extreme, right? Say meth or a drug, a hardcore drug. Would you say that they're showing their true self, or is that a drug, right? So, I mean, it's an extreme example, but it's a psychoactive substance that changes who you are.
Yeah.
That's what alcohol is, right? It's just we've all decided as a society that one's okay, which is a cultural discussion and whatever else. It's like what's happening in the cannabis space, right? Like growing up, I mean, if in Canada, if my mother ever caught me, I'd be dead, right? Game over. Yeah. And now as a culture, Canada at large is saying, no, we're okay with it, right? Which, I mean, I'm not here to say yay or nay to it. It's just a lot of those compounds and substances, or look at caffeine. Caffeine has wild effects on your brain, right? Yeah. But we're all okay with it. So, yeah.
Oh, let's touch on that a little bit. I know it's a change of subject, but tell me what caffeine does to the brain.
Oh, that's another dirty one. Caffeine does a lot of different things to a lot of different parts of your body. I mean, generally speaking, it helps to block the chemical that tells you you're sleepy. Broadly speaking, that's what caffeine does. The effects that we know and love of caffeine, it's blocking that signal to say that you're sleepy. So that's the primary one. So adenosine is the molecule.
How bad can that be for you?
Caffeine is one of these funny ones. I follow it just because I love my coffee. I do drink coffee. It's definitely a ritual for me. But it's one of these things like the butter margarine debate. At one point in science, butter was bad for you, margarine was good, and then it switched. Coffee, you can read 1 to 2 cups is good for you, 4 cups is bad for you, 8 cups is good for you. Like the science constantly changes, to be honest. So I don't know if I have a strong opinion on it. I think it's non-definitive in the research you look at. And I'm talking like everything from cancer to, I just read an article in the relation to cognitive impairment later in life. I've read good and I've read bad. So yeah, no hard opinions on caffeine. I think that's the verdict's out. It's one of those, I think, emotional products too, like red wine.
Yeah.
Right? Because we've heard red wine, a glass a day is good for you, and people love that story. So I think if you, there's a lot of personal connection to caffeine. So as a scientist, you probably got to be careful how you research it.
Oh yeah, people love the caffeine, and people love the wine and the alcohol generally. So I get quite a few comments of people just saying, leave it alone. I'm like, okay. But just on the red wine is alcohol-free red wine has all of the benefits that you want from the red wine without the alcohol. So for people who are, want all of those amazing benefits that you can get from red wine, get it from alcohol-free.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry, so we keep digressing, but I do want to kind of come back a little bit to decision fatigue. And how decision fatigue can make us more susceptible to alcohol's negative effects on decision making. So you touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's go into like a little bit more detail.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, decision fatigue, like I said, I think the core concept to think about is when you suffer from it, you're not making the best decisions that you could be, probably. I mean, in one case, you're avoiding the decision, so it's a foundation for procrastination, right? Maybe it's why you're leaving that email in your inbox for forever because you don't want to make that decision. Yeah. Or your default decision making, right? And which could be making a decision that you necessarily wouldn't if you were in the right frame of mind. So when we talk about alcohol or anything like that, is you need to be conscious of decision fatigue, because making or breaking a habit, like I said, is going to be a lot more difficult if you have this condition. So if you're saying, I want to take alcohol out of my life, or I want to lower the amount of consumption because I want to get healthier as a person, right? Yeah. If you're trying to break that habit of the beer or the glass of wine after work, it's going to be more difficult for you if you're suffering from decision fatigue. So I think it's something you may have to take stronger measures for to break a habit. So for example, maybe you need to start thinking about, okay, if there's no alcohol in the house, maybe I need to start to build that my default decision is something different. Because if you go home and your default decision is to crack a beer to relax, maybe you just need to take that out of the equation and try to build something new. It's looking at decision fatigue to say, okay, how do I optimize or position myself to be successful? If you're not thinking about decision fatigue, you're probably missing a huge component. And this is why this condition is so fascinating to me, is because decades ago, we didn't need to worry about decision fatigue, right? We were making hundreds of decisions a day. Now the thought is we're making something like 30 to 35,000 decisions every single day. We're making hundreds of decisions just about food every day. So this whole new concept is missed for people who are concerned about health, optimization, performance, living their best selves, right? Which is what you're all about, is you need to make sure that you're positioning yourself to make those decisions, or making sure that you're best situated to make a choice or a decision that you want to make, and you're not giving it to someone else.
Yeah. And so how can we make better decisions when we're feeling fatigued? Like, what can we do?
Good question. So what we know so far about decision fatigue is temporary. So it happens over the course of the day or over the course of an hour in certain stressful situations. But then if you have a good restful sleep, the next morning it's gone. Okay, so it's not something that's like, if you're stuck into it, you're going to have it for months. It kind of resets every single day, which is good because it means we have an opportunity every day. So strategies you can think about is one of the easiest ones is try to cut down the number of decisions you make each day. We already see this in high performing executives, right? Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs wear the same clothes every single day because they removed those decisions so they could focus on more important decisions every day. You laugh. Can you relate to cutting decisions?
I'm just like, how are we going to cut decisions when we're just bombarded with messages? So let me just take a step back to all of our listeners, is 35,000 decisions a day. When I first heard that number, I was like, no way am I making that many decisions a day. But it wasn't until I started to get into it that I was like, oh wait, hang on. Every time I pick up my phone and I scroll Instagram, every swipe of the thumb is a decision. Every time you look at a piece of content, you're subconsciously or consciously deciding whether to stop, pause, watch, move on. So even just in 5 minutes of being on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, you could have actually made hundreds of decisions just by scrolling past things. So that kind of then got me thinking about my day job, which is marketing and advertising. And, we talk about how in my industry, about how we're going to cut through, how we are going to help a brand cut through the messaging, because people are being bombarded with thousands, tens of thousands of messages a day that they're having to kind of consciously or unconsciously decide on whether they're going to act on it. And then all of a sudden that number of 35,000 actually becomes incredibly real, if not more. Even hundreds of decisions on what to eat. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the idea of cutting down on the decisions that you make feels really hard.
It is hard. And for me, it was the social media thing too. So I would wake up and scroll through like a Reddit, right? And you realize before I even got out of bed, hundreds of decisions. You're absolutely right. And what you need to realize though is the decisions you're making then means less decisions or less quality decisions later in the day, right? If you think of it as like a tank of gas, for our purposes, let's just think of that. You're depleting it all the way through. I mean, decision fatigue used to be called ego depletion, or they used to refer to it as like willpower. So you had a certain amount of willpower a day for making decisions, and it slowly declines throughout the day. So by giving Reddit or Instagram or any of these things your decisions early in the morning, you're giving up your decisions later that evening. So now you're not going to choose where you eat dinner as a simple example, right? You're giving someone else that decision to make over your life because you consumed your decision makings in the morning. So I think for me, I just had to be motivated to be like, okay, I give up social media, but like, I guess I'm making too many decisions. But when I start to think that actually I'm losing my capacity later, or I'm giving my free will in a sense to someone else to make decisions on my behalf, then that was impactful enough to me to start to change behavior. So I think you just need to really focus, for me at least, once I really focused on what that every decision counts, right? Every decision I make is important. And when you make a decision for frivolous things, you're giving that up. Yeah. So, and yeah, as a marketeer and stuff, it's especially tough in your industry because now you're dealing with people. How do you market to someone with decision fatigue?
And so this is really interesting. So I've actually made changes in my life over the last kind of 10 years, maybe even longer, in the name of productivity and in the name of efficiency. So I already know the week ahead. I already know my training schedule. I've already pre-booked into all of my classes. My gym kit's always laid out the night before. I've done these to help me kind of get on with my workout, not miss a workout. But actually it's probably helping decision fatigue. Other things would be my meals. So like I have an 8-week meal plan. So I already know I'm having for breakfast, lunch and dinner for 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's room for movement, if I go out for lunch or something, but it's like 8 weeks, the meals are done. So I don't have to think about it. My clothes, I have a capsule wardrobe. I have like 10 outfits and I already know what I'm going to wear the week ahead. I wear the same thing every day when I'm in my downtime with the kids. Our life is planned in spreadsheets. Our holiday, oh God, we sound really sad now. Holidays are planned in spreadsheets. So like, but we know what we're doing every day on holiday. There's not that kind of sitting around trying to decide what to do. But,
no, it's fascinating what you just said. I mean, I think this drive towards productivity is trying to answer decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think if you didn't plan that all out, like you said, like you want to know what you're doing, you want to work out. Because maybe if you had to plan what workout you need to do that day, maybe you wouldn't have made that decision, right? Maybe you would have had decision fatigue and would have chose something else that wouldn't have been good for you. So I think a lot of the drive for productivity is to tackle decision fatigue. We just didn't know what to call it for so long in our society. But everything you just described helps to lower the number of decisions you make every day, right? Yeah. Because the decision's made for you, so you don't need to put cognitive reserves towards it, right? Like you don't need to put that horsepower behind it. It's made for you already.
Yeah.
That's why habits help, right? So if you have a very rigorous ritual in the morning and you follow a habit, you're not making decisions, right?
Yeah.
So it's I always find it really interesting is a lot of this productivity stuff is probably trying to solve decision fatigue. It's people didn't know how to define it for so long, and only recently, I'm talking in the last 5 years, has this concept started to kind of come more towards the forefront.
Yeah. And I think with alcohol and giving up alcohol, I took a lot of those learnings and applied it to quitting the booze. So are there any other practical strategies that our listeners could use to manage decision fatigue, but specifically when making more mindful choices around alcohol?
More mindful around alcohol too. If we think, again, a dated term, but if we think about decision fatigue as kind of how much willpower you have throughout the day, right? So your ability to make those decisions, those good decisions later, and you already touched on it, alcohol consumption is usually later in the day, so social or networking events is going to be when your tank's already pretty empty, right? So plotting ahead is certainly a strategy like what you just talked about. So how am I going to deal with the social interactions? What am I going to order? What restaurant? Making those decisions ahead of time, because you have to assume that you're not going to be ready to make those decisions at that time of day, right? So it's planning to the situation later, right? And that doesn't apply just to alcohol, it applies to everything, right? So if you're trying to get in shape and you have to work out in the evening, what decisions can you make in the morning to make that decision to start that habit later in the day, right? So again, creating or breaking habits, I think decision fatigue will have a huge effect on that. For more practical stuff, I mean, the number one thing, and this is for everything, is sleep. So always make sure that you have a good restful sleep. What's interesting about it though is even cat naps have been shown to reduce the effects of decision fatigue. Siesta, a lot of cultures in the world already apply this. When you look at top performing esports athletes, actually they'll have to game for like 12 or 14 hours a day in these huge tournaments. And when you're playing video games, it's just your brain, right? So it's all in cognitive capabilities. And what these gamers and these elite esports athletes have learned to do actually is sleep. So for like 20 minutes, short cat naps in a loud stadium, just to restore their decision capabilities, because decision fatigue is huge in a sport like esports. So certainly sleep can help. So any cat nap will help you throughout the rest of the day. Things like mindfulness, exercise, taking a break, even going outdoors and looking at some green space and plants have all been shown to help with certain aspects of this as well. So I think general cognitive health or brain health relates very closely for decision fatigue as well. So if you're already participating and doing things to help improve general brain health, it's going to be helping with decision fatigue as well.
And then knowing that alcohol is going to affect your decision making, when you drink, for those drinkers, what do you need to be mindful of?
Yeah, great. Good question. I think it's a 1-2 punch of decision fatigue plus alcohol. So be particularly aware if you're going drinking after a long day of work or a stressful day at work, it's going to be compounding all of the problems that you're going to be suffering from, right? So you're starting to drink on unstable foundations from a decision standpoint, right? So I think that's something to be kind of hyper aware of is the state of mind that you're starting in. Versus a relaxed on a vacation sort of idea, it's very different foundations to partake in alcohol. And again, alcohol is tough though because it's a titrated effect. Small amounts to big amounts to chronic amounts. It can have a huge different problems.
And is there a way of being aware of when your decision making is faltering when you're drinking?
Yeah, great question. Not that I know of. I think a test like that would probably. I feel like it's a great idea, but commercially it would probably fail because no one wants to necessarily know if their decisions become too impaired. No, there's no easy way to tell when your decision becomes impaired. Obviously, extreme examples like you're touching your nose and things, of course.
Yeah.
But that's quite a few steps down the track.
You need a sober friend.
Yes.
Absolutely. To go, no, that guy, no, it's a bad decision. Don't go home with him.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
What you need.
Well, in alcohol too, I think people need to look at it if they're trying to improve health, and so many of us are. We want to be a better version of ourselves, right? And that's physically and that's mentally, right? And being a better version of ourselves is increasing the good, and we know what to do for all that. No one needs to tell you to exercise, to eat better. You know all those things and sleep better. There's probably not enough discussions around reducing the bad.
Yeah.
Right? We all like to talk about things you could do, but sometimes we don't like to talk about things you should stop doing or reduce doing, right?
Yeah.
And alcohol is certainly one of those. It's not good for us, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's just, if you frame it around the discussion of health and performance, we need to have more discussions of habits that we need to probably change.
Yeah. I love that you just said that, and that resonated with me so much because my whole adult life, I have always been the type of person just add more in. Like, okay, I'm going to run more, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to, just do more. Like I felt that in order to increase the good, I had to increase more. And it took me such a long time to realize that maybe I just needed to take something away. And for most of my adult life, I didn't know that was alcohol. Like I didn't believe that was alcohol because that's what everybody did in order to connect, in order to have a good time, in order to have meaningful relationship, what I thought were meaningful relationships. And so, but when it was removed, the good just came flooding in and from other places. And I think that's just definitely something people need to consider.
It's psychology, right? Like, and I have these discussions all the time when I give talks around brain health and aging and whatnot, right? I mean, when you go to the dentist and they say, oh, add an electric toothbrush. cool, I'll do that. But you don't want to hear them that, you're not flossing enough, or like it's never the negative, or that you need to take away or stop eating or drinking coffee, right? That's always what you don't want to hear from the dentist. It applies for all that. Taking away something that you're doing is much more psychologically difficult than adding something. It's easy to add something. It's very difficult to stop doing something.
For anyone that's listening and that's still here, like, I cannot tell you how transformational it was. And I wasn't drinking like I talk about. I was drinking a couple of drinks a week. It wasn't a lot in the end, but even just removing that allowed me to have the capacity to do so much more. And that has been completely and utterly transformational. And cannot recommend it enough. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But the gains are worth it. And hopefully now my brain is looking a lot healthier. It's functioning a lot better for sure. I think that is probably, we've got 5 minutes left. So I think that's probably perfect timing. Is there anything else you would like to cover, or anything else that you feel like we haven't spoken about?
I think we hit all the points.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few winding trails, but I think we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I don't have my email with me, but I think we got it all.
No, amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me, Shawn.
Well, hopefully we got what you wanted.
It's perfect. I'm going to do the closing.
Sure.
And then, but yeah, really, thank you so much. That was such an insightful conversation. And we did definitely go off on a few tangents, but I think that's because decision fatigue in itself is just such an incredible, rich topic. And I'm so curious about it. And I'm sure our listeners will be too. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling really inspired to make more mindful choices, prioritize my brain health. And to the listeners, I hope that you gained a deeper understanding of how alcohol affects your decision making, and that you feel more empowered now to take control of your choices. And I think one of the big things is just to remember, it's not about deprivation, it's about creating more space for a life filled with greater clarity, purpose, and joy. So if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. It really helps other people find the podcast and join our amazing community. I'm going to link to Shawn below so you can find him. I'll link to any of the
studies.
I'm going to link to any of the studies down below for you guys to check them out as well. Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Until
really
next
cool discussion.
time. I'm going to get you back on, I'm sure. I'm going to find something else to talk about. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.